In the summer of 1914, Germany entered the First World War with what many believed was the most detailed and confident war plan ever created. It was meant to prevent disaster, avoid a long war, and secure victory before Germany's enemies could fully react. On paper, the plan was elegant, mathematical, and precise. In reality, it began to unravel almost as soon as it was put into motion. Within the first 48 hours of execution, the assumptions behind the plan were already breaking down, and Germany was being pulled into the very kind of war it had spent years trying to avoid. The plan was known as the Schlieffen Plan, named after Count Alfred von Schlieffen, former chief of the German General Staff. Germany's leaders feared one scenario above all others: a two-front war. To the west stood France, still bitter over its defeat in 1871. To the east stood Russia, vast in size and manpower. Germany believed that fighting both simultaneously would lead to eventual defeat. The Schlieffen Plan was designed to eliminate this danger by defeating France quickly, then turning east to face Russia. The core assumption of the plan was speed. German planners believed Russia would take at least 6 weeks to fully mobilize its army. France, by contrast, could be defeated in roughly the same amount of time if Germany struck fast enough. To do this, German armies would not attack France directly along its heavily fortified border. Instead, they would swing north, march through neutral Belgium, bypass French defenses, and encircle Paris from the west. France would collapse, Germany would redeploy its forces east, and a two-front war would be avoided entirely. For years, this plan shaped Germany's military thinking. Rail timetables were written around it. Mobilization schedules depended on it. Entire corps were assigned specific routes and arrival times down to the hour. The plan left almost no room for improvisation. Once activated, it could not be paused, altered, or slowed without throwing the entire system into chaos. When war broke out in late July 1914, Germany put the Schlieffen Plan into action. On August 1st, Germany declared war on Russia. On August 3rd, it declared war on France. The next step was critical. German troops would enter Belgium, despite its neutrality being guaranteed by international treaty. German leaders knew this would almost certainly bring Britain into the war, but they believed speed would compensate for diplomatic fallout. On August 4th, German forces crossed the Belgian border. Almost immediately, the plan encountered its first serious problem. Belgium did not collapse as expected. German planners had assumed that Belgium would either offer token resistance or allow passage to avoid destruction. Instead, Belgian forces fought back, particularly around the fortified city of Liège. Belgian troops delayed the German advance for days, damaging rail lines, blowing bridges, and forcing Germany to bring up heavy siege artillery. This delay, though brief, was critical. The Schlieffen Plan depended on precise timing. Every lost hour disrupted the schedule. German units began to bunch up on narrow roads, supply wagons struggled to keep pace, and coordination became more difficult. What was supposed to be a rapid, flowing advance was already slowing. At the same time, a second assumption collapsed even faster. Russia mobilized far more quickly than expected. By August 17th, less than 3 weeks after mobilization orders were issued, Russian armies had already crossed into East Prussia. This shocked German leadership. The idea that Russia would be slow, disorganized, and months away from offensive action proved false. Germany was now facing pressure on the Eastern Front far sooner than the plan allowed. This forced a critical decision. German commanders began diverting troops east to deal with the Russian threat. These troops were taken from the Western offensive, precisely the opposite of what the Schlieffen Plan required. The plan demanded overwhelming force on the right wing in the west. Weakening it undermined the entire strategy. Meanwhile, problems continued to mount in the west. Marching soldiers covered extreme distances on foot, often exceeding expectations. Many units were exhausted within days. Supply lines stretched thin as armies moved deeper into Belgium and northern France. Food, ammunition, and medical supplies lagged behind advancing troops. The plan had assumed that logistics would somehow keep up with speed. They did not. Civilian resistance, destroyed infrastructure, and overcrowded roads further slowed movement. The German army was still advancing, but no longer at the pace required. Worse still, French and British forces were not behaving as expected. Rather than collapsing or retreating blindly, they regrouped, repositioned, and counterattacked when opportunities appeared. By the time German forces reached the outskirts of Paris in early September, the right wing was dangerously overextended. Gaps had opened between German armies. Commanders on the ground were making adjustments that deviated from the original plan simply to maintain cohesion. The carefully designed encirclement of Paris never materialized. The final blow came at the Battle of the Marne. French and British forces launched a counter-offensive against the exposed German flank. Exhausted German units, stretched beyond their limits, were forced to retreat. The retreat marked the definitive failure of the Schlieffen Plan. France had not been defeated quickly. The two-front war Germany feared had become reality. What makes the collapse of the Schlieffen Plan remarkable is how quickly its core assumptions failed. Belgium resisted. Britain entered the war. Russia mobilized faster than expected. Logistics fell behind. Commanders improvised under pressure. Within the first 48 hours, the plan was already deviating from its original design. Within weeks, it was effectively dead. Germany now faced a long war of attrition on two fronts, exactly what the plan had been created to prevent. Trenches stretched across France. Casualties mounted into the millions. Resources were drained year after year. The war would continue for more than 4 years, reshaping Europe and the modern world. The Schlieffen Plan did not fail because it was irrational. It failed because it was too rigid. It assumed enemies would behave predictably. Civilians would not resist. Logistics would solve themselves, and time would always be available. War, however, does not follow scripts. The moment reality diverged from expectation, the entire structure began to collapse. The tragedy of the plan lies not just in its failure, but in its influence. Because Germany believed so strongly in its necessity, diplomacy became secondary to mobilization. Once the plan was set in motion, leaders felt trapped by their own preparations. Stopping or altering course seemed more dangerous than pressing forward, even as the situation deteriorated. In the end, the Schlieffen Plan stands as one of history's clearest examples of how detailed planning can create false confidence. It promised certainty in an uncertain world and speed in a system that could not move fast enough. Within 48 hours, the cracks were visible. Within weeks, the plan had collapsed, and the war it failed to prevent became one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. One of the lesser-known problems with the Schlieffen Plan was that it was already compromised before the war began. Count Alfred von Schlieffen had retired in 1906, and his successor, Helmuth von Moltke the Younger, quietly altered the plan. Moltke weakened the right wing, the very force meant to deliver the decisive blow, by transferring troops to Alsace-Lorraine and the Eastern Front. These changes were not dramatic on paper, but they undermined the plan's original logic. The sweeping encirclement envisioned by Schlieffen required overwhelming strength on the right. Without it, the maneuver lost its crushing power. Communication failures further accelerated the collapse. German armies advanced rapidly across unfamiliar territory, relying on telegraphs, couriers, and rigid command structures that struggled to keep pace. Orders were delayed, misunderstood, or ignored as commanders adapted to unfolding chaos. The German High Command, far from the front, often lacked an accurate picture of events. Decisions were made based on outdated information, widening the gap between planning and reality. Meanwhile, the assumption that Britain would play only a limited role proved disastrously wrong. The British Expeditionary Force, though small, was highly trained and professional. At battles such as Mons and Le Cateau, British troops inflicted significant casualties and slowed the German advance. These engagements forced German commanders to divert attention and resources they could not afford to lose. The delay compounded existing problems and further disrupted the timetable. Another critical factor was morale and exhaustion. German soldiers were expected to march extraordinary distances under intense pressure, often carrying heavy equipment in summer heat. Many units advanced for days with minimal rest. Medical services were overwhelmed almost immediately. Stragglers increased, cohesion weakened, and combat effectiveness declined. The plan assumed physical endurance without accounting for human limits. As August turned into September, the gap between German armies widened dangerously. The First and Second Armies drifted apart, exposing flanks that the French were quick to exploit. French commanders, initially shocked by the speed of the German advance, recovered and reorganized. Paris was not abandoned. Instead, French forces redeployed by rail, one of the few advantages France possessed, allowing rapid concentration of troops at critical points. The Battle of the Marne was not a single clash, but a series of engagements that revealed the full extent of the plan's failure. German units, lacking coordination and exhausted, could not maintain offensive momentum. When retreat orders were issued, they marked more than a tactical withdrawal. They signaled the collapse of Germany's strategic vision. The war would not be short. It would not be decisive. It would not be controlled. Trenches soon carved across northern France and Belgium, freezing armies in place. The war transformed into a brutal contest of attrition, something German planners had explicitly sought to avoid. Industrial capacity, manpower, and endurance replaced speed and maneuver. Casualties reached levels unimaginable to those who had trusted the plan's calculations. The failure of the Schlieffen Plan reshaped the entire war. It ensured that World War I would be long, exhausting, and devastating. It destroyed the illusion that modern war could be neatly planned and efficiently executed. Instead, it revealed the limits of human foresight when confronted with complex systems, unpredictable enemies, and the friction of reality. In retrospect, the plan's collapse was not the result of a single mistake, but of accumulated assumptions. It assumed neutrality would be ignored without consequence, resistance would be minimal, allies would behave predictably, and logistics would never falter. Each assumption failed under pressure, and once the first cracks appeared, the entire structure unraveled. The Schlieffen Plan collapsed not because it was poorly designed, but because it demanded perfection in a world defined by uncertainty. Within the first 48 hours, reality had already deviated from expectation. Within weeks, Germany faced the very nightmare it had tried to escape, a prolonged, multi-front war with no clear path to victory. It remains one of history's most sobering lessons that even the most detailed plans can become liabilities when flexibility disappears. The opening days of World War I proved that wars are not won by timetables and maps, but by adaptation, endurance, and the ability to respond when plans fail. Germany had none of those advantages when its war plan collapsed, and the consequences would echo for generations.